All right. Well, it's wonderful to have all of you join us this evening. I'm Patrick Campbell. I'm the executive director of the Group Against Smog and Pollution. And this evening, we're looking at home health hazards and things that are in our homes that negatively affect our air quality, and some ways, some basic ways and actions and steps we can take in order to keep our air quality safe in our homes. Since that's the place where we live, and we should be able to relax and enjoy our ourselves and our loved ones, and we all want to be doing our parts to help keep ourselves and those we love safe at home. So to do just that, we have some local experts here to share their expertise on things you need to keep an eye out for in terms of negatively impacting your home's air quality, as well as some basic steps that you can take in order to safeguard healthy air quality. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, so you all can take a look at our presentation we have prepared. And there we are. Excuse me. Oops. Okay. All right. So again, want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us. Since this is being recorded, we will send a recording out to you all after, as well as those who registered but weren't able to attend. That way you have this information and the contact information of our panelists here this evening. So just a quick introduction of GASP. If you don't know who we are, the Group Against Smog and Pollution, we've been around since 1969. Go to our website and check out all of the excellent work we do on safeguarding outdoor air quality in the region. We focus particularly on education work, legal and watchdog work, and advocacy work, all to protect outdoor air quality. And you can see our officially unofficial mascot here back from the 70s, which is Dirty Gertie, the poor polluted birdie. And that was a means of teaching kids about air quality. So tonight, our panelists they'll get to do a lot more talking than I will, but just as quick introductions, you can see their pictures and credentials and their experiences here in the Pittsburgh area. There's Heath Papinchak, who runs Welcome Home Inspections, Nesta Bortey-Sam, who is a PhD and assistant professor at Pitt's School of Public Health at Pitt, and then Rhett Major, who's the energy doctor who focuses on energy audits and other kinds of home health kinds of work. So they're all going to introduce themselves and share a little bit more about their work and their priorities. But just so we all kind of get on the same page, very briefly, on the kinds of home hazards that you might see in your own home. So generally, you're going to see, potentially, you could see things like radon, carbon monoxide, mold, lead, asbestos, and smoke. And each of these have particular impacts to your health. And so that's why we've decided to focus on these, not to mention just how frequently they occur within your homes and indoor spaces. So we were actually talking about this before we started with some of our panelists. Radon. Radon is the number one cause of lung cancer beyond smoking. So it's the number one cause of lung cancer in non-smokers. And it's an odorless, invisible radioactive gas that occurs naturally, can seep up through the ground into your homes. And in Pennsylvania, we have some of the higher radon levels within the country. And so that's why anytime you do a real estate transaction, if you're buying a house, or it's just a good idea to get your radon levels tested. I think it's even required. in some municipalities. So so it's important to keep an eye on radon levels. Again, our speakers are going to talk more about that. Lead, at least from oil-based paint, is one of the most common sources of lead exposure within your home as it relates to air quality. Certainly, there's lead pipes as it relates to water contamination, but lead is particularly dangerous to babies and young children, as it can limit their brain and nervous system's developments, leading to all sorts of really devastating health outcomes. Carbon monoxide. This is one of, if any kind of combustible gas that exists in your home, or if you have an attached garage, you're going to likely have higher levels of carbon monoxide. And so the good part about this is at least you can have things like a carbon monoxide detector. Those are usually pretty affordable, and they can be installed throughout your home, or at least in areas of concern. And asbestos, asbestos, even though it hasn't been used in many of our current construction projects because it's been banned, it still exists, particularly in older homes, like many homes in Pittsburgh, because it was used as a great source of insulation back in the day. So asbestos usually becomes a problem when you disturb it, either by drilling holes through your walls, or maybe moving some of it around in your attic if it was used as insulation, that kind of thing. Here's some. I know one of our speakers in particular will really focus on looking at asbestos as it was used in attic insulation and ductwork insulation. And then, of course, the last two, mold and smoke. Mold, anytime the your home has any kind of moisture damage, mold is a concern. And certainly in Western Pennsylvania, we all know how wet our environment is. And so mold is always something to be mindful of. And again, controlling moisture as a way to prevent mold developing within your home. And of course, smoking, whether it's from smoking cigarettes or vaping, or having a wood-burning stove or fireplace. Anytime extra smoke like that is introduced into your home, filtration, ventilation, that can all help, but it doesn't, it can reduce the exposure, but it doesn't eliminate them. In that case, the best way to not have that risk of smoke in your home is to simply not have it. So we have some active steps. Of course, test for radon, change your furnace filters regularly, reduce your respiratory triggers. Again, increasing ventilation and filtration, carbon monoxide alarms. Make sure you change the batteries on those. And then you can always be a part of a solution on a higher level. You can have your house assessed, or your business, for an energy efficiency and plan improvements. And even some house plants help keep your air clean, or be mindful of what you're using to clean your home, as not all sprays and chemicals are good. And finally, we'll flash the screen back up here at the end. But if you want to keep in touch with GASP, please do. We're always happy to work with residents or anybody else who's concerned about indoor or outdoor air quality. The good news is there's loads of resources here. Thinking of groups like Raucous, Reducing Outdoor Contaminants in Indoor Spaces is an excellent group that really focuses on indoor air quality. Women for a Healthy Environment do a great job at looking at some home hazards like lead and other exposures like that. So there are lots of groups that are really concerned about public health, and we're always happy to work with you and put you in touch with those groups. So I blasted through that, and I did it on purpose because I want you all to have a good chance to talk to our panelists, Heath and Rhett, and looks like I'm going to add Nesta here as our panelists. And so so I'm going to start, Heath, with you, if you don't mind. Do you want to talk a little bit about yourself, your experiences, the work you do, uh, and just any other kinds of interesting facts about your.
Sure. Thank you, Patrick, for that intro. So I came from the background of public health as a public health scientist, and I realized that I wanted to work with people in their homes at that type of intimate level. And so I became a home inspector and also a realtor. And I mainly focus on home inspecting on my day-to-day. And so I encounter all of the hazards you named and even more on a daily basis in these old Pittsburgh homes. So I have a lot of experience with, identifying them. Also, for some of these different hazards, I test for them, not all of them. There's certain hazards that, you have to have a certain license for, like, asbestos. Rhett can talk about that more. But, just today I tested a home for mold. I did lead water sampling and I did radon sampling. And so this is something that I'm quite familiar with. And I always enjoy talking with those prospective buyers who are concerned, we want to get this home, but I can see the staining on the walls. Maybe it's mold. What should I do? And, to really also not only identify the possible hazard, but a lot of my work has to do with understanding the house as a system holistically. So what caused the mold? What are the underlying issues for that? And that's what I think I excel at with my home inspecting.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. Rhett, do you want to jump in here?
Sure. So, officially I'm an energy auditor, but that just like Heath, I wear a lot of wear a lot of hats in a job. I'm also trained as a healthy home evaluator. I did study to be a home inspector too, never did that full time. And I also work with the RAUCUS, Reducing Outdoor Contaminants in Indoor Spaces program. So I'm in a lot of old homes. I'm in the places where these contaminants show up, and I do my best to alert people to not only the dangers but the fixes. There are some fixes out there, and we'll talk about that as concerning asbestos. And it's none of these things are, well, with the exception of carbon monoxide. I'll say none of these things kill you fast. They kill you slow, and they do damage slowly over time. So people don't need to freak out about these things in their homes, but they do need to take action. Carbon monoxide is something I test in every home and in every furnace, hot water tank, or oven, in fact, that I deal with. I'm testing for carbon monoxide because that's the one thing that can kill you in 20 minutes or less if it's a high enough concentration. But the other stuff is still dangerous. It's still, we want to be aware. We still want to mitigate any of the sources that we can in the home.
Yeah, that's really important work. Thanks, Rhett. And Nesta.
Hello, everyone. So I'll just talk a bit about the research I'm doing at the University of Pittsburgh in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health. And over the years, I've been working more, well, first I'm a chemist and a toxicologist. So I study how chemicals impact our health and sometimes the mechanism or the route through which they induce adverse effect. But some of the projects I've been working on lately are around air pollution in the Mon Valley and Homewood and how that leads to asthma exacerbation. So what we are doing is looking at the criteria air pollutants by the US EPA, which includes PM 2.5, oxides of sulfur and nitrogen, carbon monoxide, ozone. Lead is not something we are looking at right now in air, but that is another project. So in monitoring these in the homes of residents, both indoor and outdoor, we are examining how they lead to or worsen people's asthma. And then part of it is also to this work I'm doing with Linda Rockers to look at or to collect the filters that people have in their homes and see how much pollutant it's accumulated over the years, because filter forensics is one technique that is being used to determine chemical pollutants and how long they could stay on filters. And that could be implied into how long have we been exposed, or how long have we inhaled those chemicals since they are within our breathing zone. Happy to talk more about some of these and many more. It's nice to meet you all again.
Yeah, thanks, Nesta. That's really important research. So thank you and your colleagues. So I'm just going to pop around you all and ask some questions we have. If anybody has questions that have joined us there this evening, please just put them in the chat. We've prepared some questions for our panelists, but it's really most important that we hear from you all. So I'll roll a couple out here, but if what they've already spoken about has popped up a question in your mind, or you think of something later, please just enter that in the chat, or then we'll stop and take some time to so you all can maybe unmute yourselves and ask a question if you don't feel like using the chat function. So just to get started, Rhett, how about I ask you? How do people talk to you about indoor air pollutants and concerns, and what do you wish people asked you more about?
When I go into a home to do an energy audit, they're usually not bringing that up. It's something that if I discover asbestos in the home or some other product in the home that's dangerous, then I'm going to bring it to their attention. That's not usually why I'm there, with the exception of my visits with the raucous. I'm there for an air quality intervention. And so those things have already been brought to light through the raucous testing, so to speak. They've been brought to light, and folks are already interested in a solution by the time I get there. I will usually do an interview with people when I first get to a home. I'll sit down with them and discuss their comfort concerns and their monetary concerns with their house. If I'm there as a healthy home evaluator, which is yet another designation, then I'm discussing health issues with it, but that's generally not the first thing that's on people's minds when I'm there as an energy auditor.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Nesta, how do you talk to people about the kind of research you're doing, and how do you get somebody interested in being a participant?
Well, that's a good question, and it's easy to assume that people would be interested. Sometimes it takes a lot to convince people to participate in the study due to different and several reasons. But sometimes explaining the effect or the potential outcomes when we are exposed to some of these indoor pollutants help. Some are curious to participate, others do not show any form of interest at all. And it's because some deliberately decide not to know, because some are of the opinion that the less they know, the better it is, while others are on the other side of it, where they are interested to know more about what could potentially be affecting their health and what strategies could be taken to minimize it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that has to be difficult sometimes, overcoming that barrier of folks just not sticking their head in the sand.
Right. I was sharing an example early on, and this is an entirely different thing, but sometimes you'd think, well, as scientists or as researchers, we think we are doing, something for the greater good, right? People might not be entirely interested in it because they feel, well, it's fine. I haven't had any issues. None of my relatives or family members or whoever I live with has any issues. So there is no need for that concern. To that point, some of these chemicals are colorless and odorless. And I think this was mentioned before. Some of them will take a long time before you start seeing effect. So you may not notice it's actually impacting health until that time when things are probably gone downhill, and then you notice, oh, I could have done something about it. But it's not always easy to let participants know that this study is relevant, and if you participated, it might help to do X, Y, and Z. And X, Y, and Z could mean that it might help to detect an outcome and then prevent it, or it might help to prevent the outcome in the first place. The core of public health is to prevent, and that's what we try to do.
Yeah, it's so important. Thank you. Yeah, and have whenever you mentioned, it was really interesting. You mentioned the house as a system, and looking at the house holistically. What how do people think about environmental hazards within their home? How do people think about air quality, or do they? It might, like Nesta was pointing out, it might be an assumption that folks do.
I think, similar to what Nesta was saying, I think you have people that are aware about these various hazards. They may be concerned about them. They want to, take their energy and investigate situations further. There are surely people who are not concerned about it. I may point out, well, here's some, a material that looks like it's asbestos and it's loose and it's hanging off of the ductwork. And they're like, you know what? I grew up in Pittsburgh my whole life. Like, I don't care. I have removed asbestos with my bare hands. So, you can get such extremes with those sorts of people here in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, in general, it's a gritty city. And I think that there's definitely people that are matching that. But surely, I also think that the awareness is on the increase, and there's definitely a growing number of people who are taking concern about these sorts of things. And I think even people who are understanding how everything is so interrelated.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, Pittsburgh in particular can be we are a unique melting pot of bumping into a lot of people. So I can imagine the kind of the questions you all encounter in your work. So I'm curious, what whenever are there some concerns we've kind of danced around it a little bit, some concerns being environmental concerns within your homes being ones like carbon monoxide, of course, that are very dangerous very quickly. You mentioned some other kinds of health hazards that are ones that take a long time. It takes a lot of exposure to see health effects. Do you find that in either case, these are underestimated or overestimated concerns by residents, by people who live in an apartment or live in a house? Rhett, do we want to go ahead and take his first crack at that one?
Yeah, so we sometimes in this business we're making obvious what is normally invisible to people. Carbon monoxide is a very good example. People do not even understand that carbon monoxide comes out of your oven when you turn it on, if it's a gas oven. I test all my gas ovens right in front of the customer. I want them to see what I'm getting out of the gas oven. And then I talk to them about using their range hood or opening a window or getting a range hood. Or yesterday, customers was looking at getting an induction oven because their gas oven was not vented out correctly. So I'm always making it visible to them with my meters. And I point out with the carbon monoxide slide on my meter that line that shows the parts per million of CO. I make it as big as I can with the little touch screen I've got. And I say, watch that. And then I fire up their oven and I show them how much comes out at startup. And it invariably, no one knows that. No one understands that. I didn't know that. I've had gas ovens when we were in different parts of the country and just never realized, never put that together. So we're making visible what is invisible to people. And so how we react or how we emphasize what we find will help to guide people in what they'll do about it. So we want to not get people fearful, but get people aware and talk about how these hazards can be mitigated, minimized sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so critical. And when how do you find people react when you open that oven door and they have that monitor and I'm sure see the readings spike probably for a while, I would bet.
Commonly they'll say, I never knew that. I never knew that. And what we do is we test in the throat of the top of the oven. You test it where they would normally stand there to stir their soup. And a lot of people do. They'll huddle over their oven doing a bunch of different things. And so they're never really aware that that's invisible substance is there until someone points it out to them. So I just make that part of every audit that I do, point that out.
Yeah, thank you. That's critical. And Heath, what do you kind of see whenever you're pointing things out? You mentioned in home inspections, and you know, what kinds of questions do you wish people were asking as you point these things out? Or Rhett, that's a great analogy of how do you make the invisible visible?
Whenever carbon monoxide gets brought up, I would say that is one of the bigger highlights, definitely one of the more triggering words for my clients. And, in terms of the position that I'm in, it's interesting because if it's for a real estate transaction, sometimes, if a realtor is there on site, some realtors can be right there concerned as well. There are also some realtors who will try to insert their perspective about it and, minimize it. But I always just try to stand my ground and express, what did I see? So, what's the problem and how can it be rectified? And, very common carbon monoxide related concern is pertaining to hot water tanks that are gas combustion and they're exhausting into an old chimney, for example. It's so common to see where there's, a hole for where the metal exhaust goes into the chimney. And, that's an opportunity for potential backdrafting of carbon monoxide. Or let's say that everything's all sealed up, but I see signs and I'm reading with the CO detector that carbon monoxide is indeed escaping. And, I explain, well, to have the chimney evaluated, maybe there's a blockage in a chimney because there's no rain cap on the top of the chimney. In the winter time, it's not uncommon for birds to perch there because it's warm, and then they get asphyxiated, they fall into the chimney, and then you have all these bird carcasses that eventually can cause for blockages, and then that carbon monoxide backdrafts back into the house, or even loose bricks on the top of the chimney that fall in. It could be the case that the chimney needs a liner, to have a continuous metal insert to help mobilize the exhaust. So, I can, talk more about those sorts of nuances, but I think really what I'm trying to illustrate here is I like to go into as much depth about what is it, why could it be this way, what to anticipate during your next conversation whenever you have a service professional come out to try to rectify this. And so just what to anticipate with that. And I think that most of the clients, when they understand that these are situations that can be corrected for, it puts them at ease. And especially, are they like, is this going to cost $10,000? And I'm like, no, it's not. This is more of what we're talking about. Just giving people a ballpark can also put folks' minds at ease.
Yeah, that's and it's so helpful to have someone like you and others who look at it, knowing that I would not have thought about the birds as a potential as a potential cause. So having that experience really makes a difference. Nesta, before we move on to you, I was curious, Heath and Rhett, do you all have? We've talked a lot about carbon monoxide, so maybe we can step away from that for a minute. But before we do you have recommendations on carbon monoxide detectors? If not a brand, that's okay, but things to look for when you'd be buying a carbon monoxide detector for for your apartment, for your home, something to keep you and your family safe.
Well, first of all, the Underwriters Laboratory listed carbon monoxide detector is purposefully dumb. They dumbed them down 30, 40, 50 years ago because of what they considered nuisance alarms. Firemen were going to houses that had transient carbon monoxide issues, but they sometimes missed out on houses that burnt down because they were busy chasing, quote, nuisance alarms. So if you look at the back of any carbon monoxide detector today, you'll see that it has to be 70 parts per million for at least 60 minutes before it will go off. Usually it's 60 minutes to 4 hours, or it could be 400 parts per million for, I think it's up to 30 minutes, or look at the back and you'll see what I'm saying. So this is, if I can get in focus here, this is a low-level carbon monoxide detector that I carry with me every house. And this thing has saved my life because it's alerted me to issues that I didn't really anticipate or didn't know about until I went in there. Now, this is a $300 tool. I don't expect that people are going to go out there, but they are available. And there's if you Google low level CO alarms, you can find one. But this one gets clipped to my belt, has a little belt clip on it. It actually goes in my briefcase, which is with me inside. And per the BPI principles, I have to have this on to protect myself in every house. And believe me, it has protected me and it has saved my butt. So normally, a carbon monoxide alarm would not show up some of the issues that we've already talked about. So I really think that there's low-level carbon monoxide poisoning happening in many people's lives that is undiagnosed, and doctors aren't generally looking for it. So I think that this is, I know I'm doing it on asbestos today, but I think this is really more of an issue than a lot of us would recognize. Now, like Heath, I've been in those chimney positions where I've pulled dead birds out of a boiler because the bird perched at the top of the chimney asphyxiated from carbon monoxide, and they'd fall down into the boiler and burn up. So these things happen, and people do not realize it. They do not know it. And then if you get enough dead birds in that chimney, suddenly you're exhausting all that CO into the house. And new equipment is much safer. Sealed combustion equipment puts it all outside to begin with, but it's really the older style of atmospherically vented furnaces and hot water tanks that are potentially a problem. But when we say it happens, it happens. Yesterday, in an energy audit, I demonstrate to the customer also what we call worst case backdrafting, where you start the dryer and the either the air conditioner or the furnace fan going, and then you try to make the hot water tank work. Well, his hot water tank was backdrafting right into return leaks. So I have the customer often standing right next to me, and I explain exactly why it's happening and what to do about it. But there's no CO alarm that would have detected that because it's a small amount and it's diluted in the house, but it's still there. It's still there. And again, these are things that carbon monoxide is only an issue, by the way, if you drive or if you have gas or oil, and a lot of us do, or propane.
Mhm.
right? And so carbon monoxide detectors, even though they are dumbed down, they will stop you from dying in worst case scenarios. So always have them in your home. Always have one on every floor of your home. Carbon monoxide detectors are inexpensive. But even the good ones, except for the non-UL listed, even the good ones are not allowed to display the amount of carbon monoxide unless you push a button. You have to push the button to some of the nicer brands. It'll keep track of those lower levels, but you have to push that button to see it because by Underwriters Laboratory, they're not allowed to display it.
That's very helpful to know, both the difference between low level as well as obviously the critical high levels, but exposure is still exposure, even over a period of time, or especially over a period of time. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And so Nesta, what, as you do your work, what kinds of questions or what what do you wish people asked you more about whenever you're spending time with them?
There are always lots of excellent questions and assessments. But one thing that I do not get a lot is how household chemicals could play a role in all of this indoor air pollution. We talk about PM 2.5, we talk about sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, lead, but sometimes the fragrances that we use, the plugins, if you're having a visitor, you would plug in and then the whole place smells nice. Those are equally exposing us to lots of chemicals that could potentially affect our health. And if you have a respiratory outcome, it makes it even worse. Right? The effect might be more pronounced depending on how long that is for. That is one thing that I noticed people don't ask lots of questions about, because if someone was coming to my home, for sure, I'll do everything possible to make sure that it smells nice, it looks nice, and everything is in order, right? So we typically don't pay attention to it, but it has a way of impacting our health.
Yeah, that's really helpful to think about the things we voluntarily put put within our homes. Yeah.
People know about or may know about PM 2.5, lead, asbestos. But yeah, the fragrances and some of the very common household things that we use, may not be familiar to a lot of people than you think. And I don't get asked that a lot. Sometimes we share that if it comes up. Other times, well, we don't, but we just look at how things are, and if there's any recommendation, we pass that along, that this or that could potentially be worsening your respiratory outcomes or making things bad, or may look bad at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And I know from some of your research, to switch gears slightly, is based on looking at how outdoor air pollution, that is something that GASP has been focused on for 55 years, ambient air quality and outdoor pollution. How does that impact your home? Raucous is a great example of a group an organization who does a great job at looking at how your indoor air quality is impacted by outdoor air quality, ambient air quality. So what are the kinds of things that you bump into, Nesta, in terms of home impacts to air quality?
That's an excellent question. And it's very common during the summertime or when it's much warmer. People genuinely open their windows to have some fresh air come in, have stale air go out, or when the place is stuffy, you open your windows for it to, but in doing so, and this depends entirely on where you live or proximity to any point source pollution or anything that is happening outside. For instance, if you open your window, right, in an attempt to get fresh air in, and someone is smoking right underneath your window, you'd notice the smell would immediately come through, and you'd smell it, that there's something going on. Unfortunately, some of the other chemicals we may not smell. So they would still be in the home. Some may settle, some may stay within our breathing zone for quite a bit. So you may open your windows, or even if the windows are tightly closed, but there are openings or leaks around it, bad air or polluted air from outside could easily seep through, and then you may inhale it for quite a bit of time. I know we talked about this and said how insulated should a house be. And again, if we take the flip or the reverse, we could ask why radon is very high, typically during the winter season. And it's probably because during the winter season, everything is closed, windows closed, doors shut, everything is sealed. So whatever levels of radon we find indoors are not going out. So everything stays in, right? So there has to be, something has to be done, right? And I think the last time Rhett had mentioned something around how tight should it be, whether it's too tight or loose. If it's loose, then polluted air could come from outdoors. If it's too tight, then the air or the polluted air indoors could also not go or get outside, and then you get to inhale it for that amount of time. Remember, we spend about 90% of our time indoors. So if there is any polluted air, for the longest time, we are inhaling it. Some may not be sensitive enough to notice the difference, and then would inhale it for a very long time. Lots and lots of studies have shown how some of these pollutants are associated with or linked with cardiovascular health and other forms of cancers. It's not only the respiratory, there are so many outcomes that are associated with it. But
Yeah, thank you. It's something to really take seriously, is we spend 90% of our time indoors, and maybe even a little more in this area this time of year. So yeah, critical. Thank you. And what are some mediation tricks or tips to reduce outdoor air pollution, or just air pollution in general within our homes?
So,
sorry.
Oh yeah, you're good.
In general, it's good to be able to examine the exterior building envelope and look for any type of cracks, that old caulking around windows, any type of gaps, voids, and so forth that could just readily allow for air elements in general to infiltrate into the home. So, that's, sometimes it can be very subtle, and it's questionable how much airflow is really coming in from the deteriorated caulking around the window, because there's the whole wall and there's that dimensionality. So there can be then insulation as then the next layer into the framing. So you may seal, or you may have that type of opening at the exterior, but you may have some insulation behind it, but you're not seeing that from the inside, but it nonetheless still could exist. And that could, kind of provide a little bit of, depending on what the contaminant is, that could be infiltrating. If it's particulate matter, for example, maybe some of that's not making its way then inside the house further. So I'd say in general to pay attention to anything blatantly obvious outside, and also, just some of the subtle maintenance sorts of things like caulking around windows and so forth.
Yeah, that's a great idea to get started in protecting your indoor air quality. And Rhett, I think Nesta had brought it up. You'd mentioned before about how it certainly as it relates to energy use, but how tight is too tight? Of course, we don't want heat to leave the home, especially this time of year. I mean, obviously, there needs to be some kind of rate of air exchange between indoor and outdoor air. But what's that balance?
We keep raising the bar on that balance, and that's a whole study on itself. We don't have enough time or enough beer to talk about that. However, in the chat, I posted about our low-cost monitoring project. See, the stuff we're talking about is mostly invisible. We'll talk a little bit about the visible stuff, but the invisible stuff, you're going to need some kind of monitor to be able to tell if there's particles in your home, if there's carbon monoxide in your home. And as luck would have it, Linda is on, and she could answer questions about the latest cohort. I'm not sure if it started yet, but the low cost monitoring project puts monitors for for many of these substances in your home, particles, radon, carbon monoxide, and then gives you a chance to self-monitor what's going on. And it then also provides lots of not necessarily remediation through ROCUS, but ideas about how to remediate, where you need ventilation, where you need to caulk, where you need to limit your exposure to the outdoor. And then the part that I play in that is the filtration. I help people prepare their furnaces to make them better filtration devices. So I help them put in a wider, more efficient filter. Sometimes after a cohort has started, I'll go in and I'll test whoever's willing to let me in their home, and I'll test the furnace, and I'll do a bunch of different tests to see how much it costs to run that air handler, what the static pressure buildup is, how good the filter is that's in there, and can we do better? And so that's just one mitigation avenue, and there are others. So I encourage people to go to the ROCUS website. Again, the link's right there, but if you just Google rocus.org, you will find all that you can want to know, basically, about outdoor air quality that gets inside our home.
Yeah, that's a really helpful resource. And we'll, as we send out the recording of this, we'll send out those links to certainly the three of you, as well as ROCUS and other groups working on indoor air quality. That way, everybody is connected with the best resources around. So thanks for bringing that up. The other thing I was curious, we've talked a lot about carbon monoxide and we've touched on radon and particulate matter and other kinds of chemicals. What about asbestos? Sometimes, especially in an older city like Pittsburgh, and a lot of homes are either sometimes being demolished right beside your home, or a lot of people are doing some remodeling work. What are Nesta? Maybe we could start with you. What are some health concerns that could present themselves from exposure to asbestos?
So asbestos is, to your point, one of those harmful chemicals that people could be exposed to during demolition, or depending on the age of the house. And typically what is said is, if it's there, don't disturb it. Once there's that disturbance, then there could potentially be that exposure. It's been linked with asbestosis. It's been linked with a few other disease endpoints. And if your house is old, I would suggest you call someone who is an expert to take a look, and then have them make recommendations. Maybe they'll say, don't touch it. Maybe they'll say, no, there is something wrong here and that you need to change it. Maybe it's caused some health effect. Maybe it's just about to happen. So if the house is old, and Rhett and Heath could talk more about what to look for and where they potentially are, and what would or could disturb them to release them into the breathing zone. But it's one of those bad chemicals that tends to affect health a great deal.
Yeah, thank you. And so Heath, what you're doing an inspection, where do you find asbestos?
It's most commonly seen in basements. I would say that it being wrapped around the boiler pipes or ductwork for the furnace, I would say in an older home, that's a finding that is maybe 80–90% of the time for an older Pittsburgh home, that I see some remnants of it. It may not be completely covering all of the ductwork or boiler pipes. You may see a few tattered ends of where it did exist. And sometimes it's the case that it's all intact and it's very pristine looking. In comparison, there's times where I see portions of the white tape. If you haven't seen it before, and I think, Rhett, you've had some really great photos of it. I'm sure you'll pull it up in a slide, but it almost looks like, a white cast, an old school cast wrapping. And sometimes you'll see, just portions of it dangling down. And if you look up close, you can see, the little fibers. And so there's that whole range where if I see it, I'll say, hey, okay, this is possible asbestos. You can surely have it tested to determine if it indeed is or isn't. In this particular situation, overall, I would say this is in relatively good condition. And then there's those times where I say basically, all the same things about getting it tested and so forth, but I'll say this particular situation, the material's in bad condition. And this is really something I would recommend, strongly urge you to have further attention given, because the risk potential is greater. And I explain to the client, what the risk is of it being aerosolized and then, breathing in a particle. And there's not any safe level of asbestos exposure. All it could take is one particular fiber that gets just embedded deep in the lung, and that could cause a whole cascade of health effects. But at the same time, someone could get lucky and they could be breathing in the asbestos throughout their life, and maybe they've never experienced any type of deleterious health effects. So, it's the whole gamut, with what goes on in life. But nonetheless, whenever I do see that material in poor condition, it goes to a whole different category in my inspection report. And then I talk with them about having the material encapsulated as an option versus having the material completely removed, the full-on abatement. And, there's a different price point and, different actions taken with each of those different categories. So that's maybe something too you'll talk more about, Rhett, but that's what goes on, with the asbestos material found in the basement. But of course, there's so many other areas: flooring, ceiling tiles, old plaster, insulation in the attic, exterior cladding material. It's plentiful.
Yeah, that's in an old school cast that we don't want to sign.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thank you. And Rhett, we don't have too much time left, but we see it. What do we do?
Let me show you some images.
That'd be great. You can go ahead and share your screen.
Gotta find so we'll press play here. This is the tape that Heath was referring to. It looks like cloth, and it has asbestos fibers embedded in it. And this, you can see some loose tape here. Here's a nice example close up of the loose tape. And what happens is these fibers are now able to escape and get into the air. We call it friable. It can be crumbled easily by hand. This is boiler pipes, and this is in bad shape. And if we would run across that, either Heath or myself, we would I would actually not do a blower door test in a house that had this kind of asbestos exposure, because I don't want to make it any worse than it already is. And in the weatherization program, thankfully, we now have money to fix asbestos issues. So that's something that will get mitigated, removed, or encapsulated before any weatherization would begin. Here's some other people's pictures of, like she said, it looks like a cast. Looks like what you had in paper mache in art class. And that's a lot of what it is, because asbestos is basically fireproof. So it was a great material to work with, but unfortunately, it crumbles and we breathe it in, and then that's the danger situation. There's some intact asbestos pipe insulation, and in a case like that, it's best to leave well enough alone. It could be encapsulated, but oftentimes removing it presents more dangers than just leaving it alone. Here's some, you can see people were foaming up here in the corner, and that's asbestos pipe that was never touched. There's some falling off of this joint that that becomes friable. That becomes something that we would have to address. Some more asbestos pipe insulation. There's some really bad shape asbestos pipe. Now, a lot of this was removed in the 70s because we began to pay attention in the 70s and 80s and maybe the 90s. There was money, governmental money, to remove asbestos. So a lot of this has been removed. But if you look here, the main line of the boiler, it was removed, the boiler pipe, but they forgot the elbows here. So it still has to be dealt with. There's some, you can see the fibers there if you look up close in the insulation. So it is in a lot of these old buildings. Anything before 1978, they were still using it in residential. They still use it in commercial and industrial situations, but since 1978, it's been outlawed in residentials. This right here is the vermiculite insulation that I mostly would run into, and it is zonalite attic insulation. It's a particular brand. Vermiculite itself is inert, but there was one mine in Libby, Montana that the Zonalite company had, and there was a vein of asbestos running through a vein of vermiculite. And so a lot of the vermiculite is contaminated. And R.W. Grace eventually bought that company. And so now they're handling, I'll show you the the lawsuit that was generated by it, but that's what vermiculite looks like. I think of it as puffed rice. If you remember the old puffed rice, it's about the size and weight of an old grain of puffed rice. There it is, a little bit of a close-up. And see how small that is. It's actually, the rock itself is baked, so it expands, and that's why it's a good insulation, because there's air trapped in it. Oh, there's a nice one. So if you find that in your attic, first of all, leave it alone. Don't go playing in it. We cannot insulate around it, but there is a Zonalite Attic Insulation Trust that was a result of a class action lawsuit, and this will help pay for the removal and the replacement of attic insulation. If you just go to Zonalite Attic Trust, Google it, you'll get to that website, and there's a process that you would follow to get your little sample of your vermiculite. You could send it off to them. They will test it for asbestos. They will tell you if there's a quantity of asbestos in it. If it is, then you proceed with their program. If it's not, then you're okay to work with it, because vermiculite itself is not the problem. It's the asbestos contaminated vermiculite. So that is, there's millions of dollars still in that Zonalite attic trust. So there it is, the before and after, but then you need to be re-insulated. So they, if I remember right, they will pay 40% of the cost of removal and re-insulation. So that means you're going to put out some money first, but they will work with weatherization programs and utility programs if the utility programs want to work with them. These are tiles, 9-inch tiles that not only have asbestos in them, but they're also put down with a mastic, a black mastic that is asbestos containing. So if you go into a home, I'm sure Heath sees this, with 9-inch tiles, leave them alone. Do not try to take them up. Do not try to scrape them up without tools and protection. Basically, you would not want to do it yourself. Most flooring guys will just go right over top. They'll put a new layer of 1/4-inch Luan on top of that, and then put their floor on top of that new layer of Luan to encapsulate the old floor. There's a guy doing it. He's all taped up, and he's got probably negative pressure in that room, so any asbestos fibers would be blown outside through a negative pressure system. And other place you might find it is asbestos tile siding, and slate siding is what it would be called, but it's an artificial slate. It's not real slate. So there was a time we used to drill through this. We used to take them off. We used to insulate underneath this, and we're not allowed to do that anymore in the weatherization. And then this is a type of asbestos in these asphalt fake bricks, insul brick it was called, and there can be inside of that they also can have asbestos fibers. The only way you really know is to have it tested. There are local laboratories that can test it. Again, if it's attic insulation only, you can get it tested for free, but everyone else you're going to have to pay. But you can just look in your yellow pages or Google your local laboratory, and they can test whatever you have to see if there is asbestos in it. That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Rhett. And we can definitely send some links out along with the recording of this based on the trust, the legal action you mentioned, as well as the home mitigation funds for people to do some, or excuse me, to do some home insulation and home maintenance from the state. So that's really helpful. Thank you. So as we're at 7:02, I want to respect your time and everybody else's that has joined us this evening. Maybe we could go round robin and say what are the what's the top trick or tip or two that you all would recommend to anybody to help limit their exposure to environmental hazards within their home. What's the one or two things that people could do right away to protect themselves? Heath, can we start with you?
Nesta, I really appreciated you saying about the scented products in homes. I will tell you that is incredibly prevalent. And whenever I actually inspect in homes, sometimes I didn't even make it to the front door, and I can smell those chemicals coming out of the home. I may go and drop off a radon test kit and be there for 5 minutes, and I come out and my lips taste like it. I smell my glasses, and my clothes already are cloaked after 5 minutes of being in that home. Whenever I actually go and inspect in those homes with plugins, I can barely tolerate it. And I am well aware of the research that has gone on already in the field of public health, demonstrating the negative consequences of scented products. And so, yes, I agree with you, Nesta. I would say for folks to really pay attention to what they are voluntarily exposing themselves to in their home with the scented products, and even laundry detergent. It's incredible, just that too. I may not even see any plugins in the wall of scent, but it's just that they're using the fabric softener or some very strong detergent. And that is concerning. So I'd say focus on that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Rhett?
I would say everybody go home tonight and change your furnace filter. Then take the old filter, put it in a bag, tape it up, and call Nesta, because he studies that stuff. He wants to see what was in your house. And what you want to do is get it out of your house. I can't tell you how many times I'll go in the basement and there's 5 or 10 old filters just laying on the floor. They've taken them out, changed it, and then left it to leave all those contaminants in their home. So get them out of your house, put them in a bag, tape it up, call Nesta.
Yeah, that's great advice. Nesta, aside from being the lucky one to receive all these furnace filters, what are some other good tips?
I would strongly encourage everyone to participate in what Ruckus is doing. It's 100%. One of the ways you could know what is inside of your home and what is outside, because you get to do both indoor and outdoor. And then also you get to do all of it, right? PM 2.5, carbon monoxide, radon, and it's really good and helpful to know what is in, because if you don't, it might only make things worse, or now everything is fine, but health might be deteriorating, or it might make your health conditions poor. But once you know, that is when you can take action. Or example, the asbestos with Rhett and Heath have talked about, the carbon monoxide, the fragrances of plugins, everything we've talked about. It's really good that you test to know what is there, and then you seek professional guidance. What can I do to solve it or fix it? And luckily, I think almost everyone is here. Linda is here, Rhett is here, Heath is here. So
Yeah, the experts are here. Yeah, that's right. Well, that's great. I'm looking at the time here. I do know there were a couple questions in the chat that I snagged that what we can do is answer those, put those to our speakers and send them in an email to folks who have asked those, or just out to the group in general. That way we honor those questions, and but also honor everybody's time and recognize it's 7:07. So and great, Rhett even jumped in there while I was talking, so thank you. But really want to say thanks to Heath and to Rhett and to Nesta for sharing your expertise and your time this evening. You've mentioned, we've all mentioned other groups like Raucous and Women for a Healthy Environment. Thank you to them for their presence and their good work. And like I said, we'll be sending this recording out, as well as any some answers to these questions, as well as resources. But I also want to say, if there's ever anything GASP can do for anybody on this group, please feel free to reach out, check out our website. That's where you can learn anything and everything about ambient air quality that you would ever want to know. So please check that out as an educational resource, and keep us in mind as you bump into all sorts of things as we live together. So again, thank you, Heath, Rhett, and Nesta. Thank you to all who have joined us this evening, and hope you all have a great evening.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, folks.
bye-bye. Good to
Thanks.
see you again, Heath and Rhett, and Patrick and Laura.